Welcome to the Speexx Exchange podcast with your host, Donald Taylor. As a renowned learning and development industry expert, as well as chairman of the Learning and Performance Institute, Donald sits down with experts from around the globe to talk business communication, learning technology, language, digital transformation, and engaging, upskilling, and reskilling your organization. This podcast is brought to you by Speexx, the first intelligent language learning platform for the digital workplace. Listen in and you might learn a thing or two.
Welcome to the Speexx Exchange podcast with me, Donald H. Taylor, and our guest today, Jeff Kortenbosch. Jeff is learning designer at Inter IKEA Systems, or IKEA Systems, based in the Netherlands, and it depends, I guess, the pronunciation on where you're based. Jeff is talking today about 20 questions to ask before discussing learning objectives. That's a lot of questions to cram into a podcast, and I'm going to hold Jeff to task on that. Can we actually talk about all 20? We'll see. But Jeff, before we get into the podcast, please, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Donald, for having me. I'm Jeff. As Donald mentioned, I work for Inter IKEA Systems, which is the franchisor for IKEA. And I work there as a learning designer. So basically, I come up with learning experience concepts that we translate into actual learning solutions for our business and our franchisees.
You managed to describe your whole job without mentioning the word content once, Jeff. Is that deliberate?
I would say yes and no. No, content is nothing without context. So I would never use content in my in what it is that I do.
And that may be a theme for the rest of the podcast. Let's hold on to that thought. Content is nothing without context. Jeff, 20 questions. Before we even start discussing learning objectives, that's a lot of questions. Where do they come from?
So I've been around the block for a little while. And I think I've been doing this for like almost 15 years in an official L&D role. And before that, almost 10 years as just a guy in the business being made responsible for training people in the things that we were doing. And every time you have a request come in, especially when I came into the job of e-learning designer, people come to you, say, hey, you're an e-learning designer, I want an e-learning. And then you have a discussion with them on what should be in it. And somewhere along the way, obviously I matured and my insights matured, and I started asking different questions, and they started to evolve more and more. In the past couple of years, I've been really hooked into the 70-20-10 framework, the 5 moments of need model that talk about different learner needs moments. And with that, my questions started changing. And I noticed that a lot of people were always struggling to get from, hey, how can I move from they want me to make a training into having a meaningful discussion and seeing what will actually solve the problem. And the more and more discussions I had with people working in other companies and peers, I thought maybe I should just write these questions down, if not just for me as a job aid, then just to share with others, so maybe it's useful to them.
So you've created these over a period of time, and these are not abstract things. They're things that you've used. Well, in English, the phrase is use them in anger. It doesn't mean you're angry when you're using them, but you've used them for real.
Yes,
for real, and you've improved them as you went along. By the way, Jeff's mentioning 70-20-10, 5 moments of learning need. So you'll be familiar with the work of Charles Jennings and Bob Mosher and Conrad Gottfriedson, and we'll put those links in the notes. So if you want to jump off and find those, all part of the resource we try to make available at the Speexx Exchanges podcast. But Jeff, 20 questions clearly honed from experience. They look to me like essentially performance consulting questions. Is it fair enough to say that's what they are?
Yeah, I think they find their basis in performance consulting, in needs analysis, in probably some learning objective analysis, So yeah, it's a mix of different things that I've felt that when put together in this really have helped me have a great conversation, help the customer, internal or external, think about what their actual problem is, what their need is, what will help. So it just drives a better conversation.
And to go back to the first point, the example you gave at the beginning, what we're talking about is trying to avoid that conversation where you suddenly are presented with a client who wants something and you've immediately gone down a particular format of training solution. It's the 20 things you say before you get to that point. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. And sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, you go on.
So, okay, what I wanted to say is one of the things that I've noticed over the past couple of years that about 40% of my learning requests, my training requests, get cancelled after having this really good conversation. So that's awesome. So that's 40% of my time, of budget, of people's time in the business that not being spent on something that felt like a training need but wasn't. Another 40% is kind of becomes more compact and more relevant because we are asking the right questions. We know, okay, we cannot address this part with training, and it's something someone else in the business has to take care of. But we can take care of this part of the problem and address that. So your solutions become more relevant for the actual target audience. And I'd say that about 20% turns into actual performance solutions. And that actually have a business impact.
So the promise of the 20 questions is that you are able to focus your time where you're going to have an impact and stop spending it where you're producing stuff that isn't going to affect the business effectively.
Yeah, and no just shoving content into the organization anymore.
Right, okay. So we're stopping being, your phrase I always use, Jeff, is you're going to stop being a course factory. And the other side of that is start helping the business perform better. All right. Yeah. Look, we can't even run through the 20 questions talking about them really quickly. So can you just tell me, of the handful of questions, of course, you can never ask a parent who their favorite child is, but which are your favorite?
Okay, so I think they're all equally good and they're good combined. But if there are just a couple of ones that I can highlight, that's always what I tell people to do as well. If there's just a few questions of these that you can embed in your process, right? Talk about these. So I'll leave out the obvious one about what's your target audience like and that kind of stuff. So one of my all-time favorite questions is, what does success look like? Close your eyes.
Why is that so important, Jeff?
Well, what I've noticed in all those conversations, the moment I start talking about, okay, so what's the problem? So that's an important question, right? Often they don't really know the problem. But when I start talking about the problem or the challenge that they have or the change they're going through, they have no end goal in mind. So somewhere along the lines, they quickly jump to the conclusion, hey, this thing is going on and we can probably train people and then we've got that nailed. Well, in reality, that doesn't work. So I really want to know more about what good looks like. Mm-hmm. So a year from now, 2 years from now, however long it takes, at some point we have solved it. And what do we see in the organization? How are people behaving? What are they doing different from now? And if you know that, then you kind of are able to reverse engineer what you can do from a training point of view and what you need to do from a motivational point of view and what you need to do from an organizational point of view.
Jeff, when you've had conversations with people asking this question, what does success look like? What does good look like? Some people will know. Great. Okay. And for those people, perhaps, hopefully, we have something we can do. And if not, we don't. We'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah.
The other people.
Yes.
Well, what on earth were they thinking when they came into your office, virtual or otherwise, and said, I need a training course, but they don't know where they're trying to get to? What were they thinking? And what process do you go through to get them out of potentially a difficult position where they're asking for something without any idea why? How do you help them out of that to a position whereby they feel good that they've come to a good place, whatever that is, which it might be. We need training or we need some resources, or we need something else entirely. So there's a lot behind that question, and I'm particularly interested in the people who just didn't know what they were talking about when they came in.
Yeah, well, oddly enough, it's the discovery of not knowing that you don't know is actually it usually gives a positive vibe to the conversation, because it's a really good question, and it shows that I'm actually interested in helping them solve their problem. So it's not a big deal in getting them from we need training into, okay, but what does the solution look like? One of the other questions is, do you have a solution in mind already? And they usually tell me a little bit about their training. It's my parking lot question. So then they got that out of their system. They're still thinking we're talking about training. So that's one that comes before the what the success look like. And then they're already kind of at ease, because in their mind, we haven't discarded training yet. We're just talking, okay, what does good look like?
So I want to go back there, because that's something I was going to lead on to, and you've done it beautifully. These conversations are not just about discovering facts, but they're about a relationship between at least two people, and the trust between those people. And by having the conversation where you mentioned training and getting it off their chest, because they had that in mind when they came in. And if you don't get it out in the open, they're going to imagine you're getting to that point and perhaps not be open to listening to anything else. So I think it's a great question to ask about that. Yeah. What solutions do you have in mind? But how do you then make sure that you have a trusted relationship with someone whereby they are happy to listen to you, perhaps telling them that they're talking rubbish?
Well, I wouldn't say rubbish, but I don't know. You're guiding them along a process, I guess.
Okay.
And what I usually see happening is, that light bulbs just turns on, or the puzzle pieces fall into place. And I've been in meetings where they say, okay, so I don't know what good looks like. I need to go back to my team and discuss with them what good looks like. Can we have another meeting in like 3-4 weeks from now? Yes, of course we can.
Jeff, very often in my book, in the interviews I did for my book, Learning Technologies in the Workplace, I interviewed people who were successful in implementing a learning technology, and they would say, well, we did A, B, and C, and that was the reason they were successful. But very often I would see a commonality between the people I interviewed that had nothing to do with A, B, and C. It was something else entirely. And I think actually you've just demonstrated it, which is that your questions are important. That's A, B, and C. But underneath that, there's something else, which is your approach, which is that you're approaching it not as an order taker, but as a positive, supportive consultant who, as you say, is taking people through a process to get to a point that helps them. It's a mindset thing. It's a mindset thing. Now, look, we could do another podcast some other time about mindset. Goodness knows. It's going to take us, that's a whole different thing. But I think it's important not to forget it, that really the 20 questions in themselves probably are not a silver bullet, wonderful though they are. They don't work if you're not using them in the right way.
Exactly. No, it has to, I think there has to be a true desire to help someone with the right solution, right? And there are times that in the end they say, well, I want training, give me training, you're responsible for training, go and do it. So you cannot win them all, right?
Yeah.
You have to, I always say it's a marathon and it's not a sprint, but you do have to have the energy of a sprinter. It's something that Henriette once told me. So it's an important thing to have a long-term vision. What I often see in suppliers, and I've done a short stint as an external consultant for an agency. Often suppliers, they're pressured. You have to be billable. They have to make money. So. And if you bring a game designer, the solution will be a game. And if you bring an e-learning designer to the meeting, the solution will be an e-learning. So they're also selling what they've got on offer. And what I like is just to take a step back from that and see, okay, what will help us solve this? So and anything is possible.
We spent about 10 minutes discussing one of these questions. We're going to have a whole podcast series just looking at each of the questions. But I asked you to focus on the key questions, and that's got to be one. what does success look like? After you've asked a bunch of questions as well beforehand, but you ask that question, and that establishes where you're trying to get to. And if they don't know the answer, you can help them in the process of getting to understanding what it is. One of the other questions you ask is about performance being a function of ability, motivation, and opportunity. Could you tell us more about that question?
I can. The question comes from what areas affect the desired outcome, right? And I think I saw one of these graphs in Katie Moore's blog when she talks about action mapping, and you referenced something else when we were pre-discussing this, Purcell and Boxall, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple of guys, Purcell and Boxall, who wrote about this in the early 2000s, and we'll get, again, references to that in the notes, Kathy Moore and Purcell and Boxall. But yeah.
And there's this really nice graph where you just put knowledge and skills in two quadrants and motivation and organizational barriers in two quadrants. And that's where when you're talking about the problem or the challenge, say, okay, what problems do we have in which areas? And where we are responsible for learning, training, where you would focus on knowledge and skills. It's always great to see, and like 9 out of 10 times this happens. People are starting to write post-its and they're putting them in the quadrants. And then you see all your bottom quadrants about motivation and organization filled up with post-its, and just a handful in the top quadrants with knowledge and skills. So and then you can say, okay, so we can address this top part, but you and your organization needs to look at the motivational and the organizational barriers that are in place that are stopping you from performing, or whatever the problem or challenge is.
And I would also say that Nigel Harrison, you've described a particular technique there of having a quadrant, using post notes to stick into one of 4 areas. That would be knowledge, skills, motivation, opportunity. Nigel Harrison has a lot of work on that. We'll make sure we have that included in the notes section as well. And it is it's absolutely right that people very often make what I call a series of steps towards training, well, if actually a course being the inevitable solution, from there being a performance solution. But on that way, you could branch off into many different areas, and some of them are that it could be a motivational issue, or it could be that simply it's not possible in the organization as it's set up at the moment to even carry this task out properly. So maybe nothing to do with
training. Yeah.
And I always say to these people, guys, you know what? The most important thing in all of this is always motivation. And I say this from a personal point of view. I very often lie in bed in the morning. My motivation is at 0. I literally am not even ready to get out of bed and do anything. And yet you've got to do it. Now, your ability generally is not at 0 for your job. Your motivation can be. So the person who gives you the motivation makes that possible. Hey, that's very important. Now, that's a way of getting around the discussion with a manager sometimes to say, is there a motivational issue in the team? Are there things which are really stopping well-able people from doing their job properly?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, root cause analysis, that's another thing you're asking. You ask people, have you done a root cause analysis? What exactly do you mean by that, Jeff?
It's really, to understand what success looks like, you need to know what the problem or the challenge is, right? So you need to have looked at what is going on in my organization. Why am I having this problem? And seriously, and there's great research about how to do proper root cause analysis, and it's important that what you're doing is important for the business. It's important for the performance of your organization, of your people, and you need to have figured out why this thing is going wrong before you can correct it.
So there's 2 sides to this. There's what does success look like? But when you're asking yourself that, to take the medical analogy, you've got to treat not the symptoms but the cause. Because if you're looking good is that the fever is cured, then simply having a cold flannel on somebody's head is not going to cure the fever. That will help the symptom of the temperature, but you have to get in there and solve the virus that's causing it, or whatever.
Exactly.
So the root cause analysis gets us to that point. Well, in your experience though, Jeff, and I think in the experience of a lot of people, most people haven't done any form of analysis really. They come in with a gut feeling that they've got a problem. They know what the cause is. So how do you persuade them to dig deeper?
Well, I'm lucky enough now to be internal L&D professional, so I am there to help. What I've found when on the external side, organizations were much more reluctant to say, yeah, we haven't done our homework and we've got no clue really. But we're not going to tell you that because it makes us look bad, or they're not so keen to share that they have not done that, because when we offered, hey, we can help you with an analysis of what's going wrong, and no, we know what's going wrong, we need the training, right? It's a difficult part, so you really need to it's part of the relationship you have or that you're starting to build, that they might feel free enough to do that, or if they're serious about solving their problem. But often they just would see us as someone coming in asking X amount of money to do an analysis to tell them what's wrong.
Yeah.
And I've been in situations where they actually said, yeah, go ahead. And then when I presented, hey, this is what's wrong. Oh, well, we could have figured it out. Yes, but you haven't. You asked me to do it. So it is a tricky one, indeed, but an important one.
Jeff, drilling down on that again, what is behind that question is the relationship between the people involved. To ask the question and to be able to offer perhaps some tools to help drill down, you have to be a trusted advisor. You have to be somebody that they see as somebody that they isn't. It's not just that you're competent. It's also that you're not going to make them look bad. That's really kind of important.
Yeah.
Because what I'm thinking to myself is, hey, if it's just 20 questions, that's easy. Give them the 20 questions on a piece of paper and that'll solve it. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to have the conversation. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, it is not something you send out. I've seen people do that as well when there is a learning needs analysis, or the minute you put it in a form, they start sending it out. But it is a job aid, I did a course on consulting, and this guy actually said, "Hey, I've got these questions and I've got them in my mind now. I don't know. I'm lazy. I don't have them all in my mind in the right order. I just got them on the side. I've got these questions I want to ask and I want to write down, and I'll give it to you. So we're building a business case together. I'm helping them build their business case for their problem, for their solution, for the investment they're going to make to solve it.
You're helping them make that business case. Just before we go on to my next question, how do you, if you're physically in a room with somebody asking these questions, sounds strange, but there's a method to my madness here. What is it that happens in that room physically? Where are you in relation to that person? How do you place yourself to get the most out of that discussion?
If I can, never opposite of them. Physically, you're asking, right?
I was trying to ask the question in a way that wouldn't lead you to what I think is exactly the right answer, Jeff, but carry on.
So I'd love to sit either next to them, or, if you're at a table, each at a corner, but, close. And one of the things, if we're doing next to each other, then maybe I put my questions on the big screen and we're both looking at that, and while having that conversation, that actually works well too, because then you're not in interrogation mode, right? Because that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to help them with my questions, and if they don't know the answers, it's all right. It's not a quiz. It is us working together on getting a good picture of what's going on and what we could do to solve it.
I think you painted a description of a physical setting, which I think vividly helps people understand the importance of that trusted advisor role. You're sitting next to somebody, you're not giving them a quiz, you're walking together down the path.
Exactly.
Okay. So, Jeff, where can people go to learn more about these 20 questions? Because we've not given them the 20 questions, and people are going to think, well, Don, you've ripped us off for this podcast. I came here expecting 20 questions. Where are they? So where can people go to find them?
Yeah, I'm guessing we're going to provide some links.
Yes, we
I've
are.
got my personal blog, and I write articles on LinkedIn as well. So we'll put the links. We'll make the links available.
Okay, listeners, thank you for bearing with us, but the links are there in the notes. Now, everybody who comes on the Speexx Exchange podcast, we ask two questions. What do you wish you'd known when you started in L&D? And what are you curious about right now in workplace learning? So I'm sensing I may know the answer to this one, Jeff, but what do you wish you'd known when you started in learning and development?
These questions are I remember when I started out in L&D and it was when I was a junior e-learning designer. I come from a background of IT, not of educational science. So I was just doing it, following my gut feel. So what are the topics we're addressing? And I've seen plenty of online training, and so I just did what I did. If I had asked these questions, my life would have been so much easier. I've built so much content without context, and stuff that I know will never solve the problem that it was trying to solve, because I wasn't clear on how to get to that point. I didn't know how to have that conversation yet when I started out, and this, if I would have this as a checklist, that would have been awesome. A great start.
So I hope that this means that we've got people listening now who are saying, I don't have to go through the hell that Jeff went through, or just production of great looking but perhaps not very effective content, and now I can be confident I'm going to be producing stuff that's useful and helps people out. Great. Okay. Yeah. What are you curious about, Jeff, right now?
Well, we hear a lot of talk about performance-focused training and learning and support, and adding value as L&D, and not being a cost center, not being a course factory. And I've been walking around with performance support and that kind of stuff for over a decade at least, and there wasn't any pickup then. The idea was really good, but the actual pickup wasn't. And I see a lot of organizations are now getting an interest in seeing doing things differently, and I'm very curious to see how fast that uptake is, and what that transforms into.
So to summarize that, you've been carrying the flag of performance for a number of years. Not many people have rallied behind it. You're seeing people rally behind the flag now.
Yeah.
But if they're not behind the performance flag in learning, I'd have to ask, what on earth are they doing, Jeff?
Yes, and it's a great question. But again, I rolled into L&D in a time where my technical savvy made me somewhat of a specialist over the people I had in front of me. A lot of people come into L&D roles not with that background, or with, I don't know, more traditional schooling. I was talking to Mike Taylor last week at Learning Tech Day in Ghent, and he said there are people who don't know some of these names that everybody in the L&D industry should know, right? If we talk Charles Jennings, I don't know, if you're serious about your job in L&D, you should have at least heard of it. Maybe you disagree with it, but you've heard of him, right? So there are, not everybody is where they need to be, and we're all developing and growing in our roles, and not everybody who's responsible for learning, development, and human performance are where they need to be just now. So it's a matter of time, and I'm truly curious to see, with all the buzz around it now and the technology becoming easier, how fast the pickup will be, how the transformation will be.
How quickly we move from, to go back to the beginning of the podcast, the idea that our jobs are about the creation and distribution of content, regardless, that's the focus, to the idea that our job is about short-term and long-term performance. And in that, content is one way of achieving that goal, and there are others as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's about adding value to your organization with what you do. If I pull IKEA, we've got 200,000 people. If I pull them out of work for a half a day workshop on something, that's 200,000 times half a day.
It doesn't bear thinking about. That's 100,000 days. Let's say a day costs you. Oh, I can't even. But it's tens of millions of euros that we're looking at there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even if you're still creating a training that doesn't tick all your boxes, but you're able to shorten it, make it more compact, make it more relevant, then you're already winning. Like I said, not every solution is a full-fledged business performance solution. It depends on where you work, but most organizations are far away from there. And some L&D organizations will even say, "Hey, this is not what we are supposed to do." Now, I've talked to plenty of forward-thinking L&D professionals saying, "Yeah, I'm getting I'm getting a lot of pushback from my managers and the manager above that what I'm doing is not L&D." So there's a movement, there's a change going in our profession, in the industry, and I'm very curious to see where that will lead us. Exciting times ahead, I think.
Exciting times, Jeff Kortenbosch from IKEA, from Inter IKEA Systems, excuse me. Thank you very much for sharing your curiosity, what you wish you known at the start, and of course, your 20 questions that you should ask before discussing learning objectives. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Don.